Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of JRPG Journal. Now, most of the games that I've talked about on the show so far have pretty much been PS1 era JRPGs, but today I want to kind of take a leap to the PS2 era real quick and talk about one of the premier launch games, and I feel like one of the more revered games on the system, and that is Dark Cloud, or as the Europeans might know it as, Dark Chronicle. Now, I was a spoiled kid, I'm not gonna lie. I always got the new console as soon as it came out, and so I was there, pretty much on launch day. Got I think The Bouncer was one of the first games I got, and of course Dark Cloud. It was a JRPG, and I thought, okay, this looks cool. Of course, as some of you might remember, this was a game that everybody kept saying, oh, this is a Zelda ripoff. It looks like Link on the cover. That's all people remembered from that game, was that it looked like Link. And but it seemed interesting because there was action combat, and you could build your own town, which was, I thought, really interesting, because leading up to the release of this game, me and my friends were really into RPG Maker back on the PS1. Now, obviously the tool set was limited, but it was really cool to be able to set up your own world and walk around in it. And obviously that was the big hook for Dark Cloud, was, go to these dungeons, find pieces to a city, and just put it back together. Now, from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Then again, it is a video game, but from a gameplay mechanical standpoint, it was so addicting. It was this amazing gameplay loop where you would go into a dungeon to get in some cool battles. You would get these little balls, and it was sort of a random chance as to what would come out of them. And then you would go back to town, see what you got, and then you just start putting the pieces together. And what was kind of neat, though, it wasn't as simple as simply putting the pieces together. But if you go around to the various inhabitants of the towns you started creating, what they would say is, oh, hey, I really want to be next to the ocean, or I want a tree next to my house or something, or like, oh, I don't want to live next to this person. So you kind of have to coordinate your house in a certain way to make sure everybody's needs are met. And depending on how well you did, once the final town got put together, then you would get interesting rewards. I believe. I think you got some kind of bonus, if outside of just like a good score or whatever. So there was definitely an incentive to try to make the town the best way possible. But it was just a really neat idea at the time. Like, I can remember just never seeing a game quite like that, because it would have been typically like just really straightforward, where you would go and do something, and there was a story or whatever. But this is like you could play at your own pace type of game, because you could just sit and go and do the dungeons forever. Or you could simply go do a little bit of grinding, come back, build bit by bit. So I feel like it was a good way to balance the game, and everybody could kind of play it at their own pace. But for me, I remember one of my favorite cities, I think it's the second town you go to, because as you build towns, you go to the next one and you have to keep rebuilding them, was this town. It was sort of like sort of city by the sea type thing, and I love that sort of stuff. Obviously, if you remember from last week's episode of Chrono Cross, where I talked about how much I liked oceany type things and themes, and I can just remember Dark Cloud being really interesting in that way, because there were a couple seaside levels. There was the one seaside level, and then there's also sort of like a jungle, but there was a river that went through it, and so you had to really kind of coordinate your town around that. Like, would you be by like a lake or a waterfall or that type of thing? So it was really cool. And I remember the camera also being a little frustrating. You had to, cameras in action games, they didn't quite figure it out yet. So there was a lot of lock-on stuff going on, where it would lock onto the enemy and you're always looking at them, and you had to kind of like strafe around. Very reminiscent of like Ocarina of Time, again, kind of going back to how this was a lot of people thought this is a Zelda type of game. But what I also find, looking back now, it was Level 5's first game, and I remember that was just a stamp that going forward I would always remember. I'm like, oh, Level 5, they made that Dark Cloud game. Unfortunately, I never got around to playing the second one, But they went on to make other great games like John Dark and, of course, Rogue Galaxy, maybe the most criminally underrated RPG on the PS2, and I'm sure we'll get to that one someday. I can also remember there was a like a sunken ship level, and gosh, I don't think I ever got past that, or there was one right after that, and I just can remember getting really, really frustrated. There was like a certain enemy, or like the layout was in such a way that like you needed to have a certain character, because that was another cool part where there were certain doors you couldn't open unless you had a certain character, and they would unlock in different ways, and they had their own stamina meter and that type of thing. And I can just remember you'd get to a certain point and you couldn't progress because you needed a certain character that you didn't have yet, and so I can just remember getting a little frustrated in that regard. But it was neat. It was almost like Wild Arms in a way, or Metroidvania in a way, because you needed to have certain abilities to unlock certain areas, and I thought that was kind of neat in one way and also frustrating in another way. They could have done it a little better because of the way you had to manage your hunger and your water and stuff like that. So there was a lot of stat managing that went on, but I feel like that this was almost like a roguelike in a way now. Like we could think of it like that now, where you would go in, get all the stuff, come back, you just kind of keep going. And I believe it was also randomly generated levels, so every time you went down there it wasn't the same layout, which also made it exciting because you could replay the game or replay the levels, and you just never knew what you were going to get. It was really interesting. And I kind of look back on that series pretty fondly now, at least the first game. Like I said, I never got around to the second one, but I always wondered what it would be like if Level 5 were to go back to that series now, especially now with the town building and the action combat dungeons. Like I feel like there would be a lot of cool stuff they could do. I feel like they tried to do a little bit of that with White Knight Chronicles, but to me White Knight Chronicles didn't pan out. The game itself wasn't fun, so it didn't make the town building stuff really, really worth it. But in the end, I think the part that really hooked me and the part that I really enjoyed most definitely was the town building part. It was just so cool to arrange these worlds in your own way, and then just walk around them and explore. And each time you would plant down a building or a person, you could go talk to them and they would give you items and stuff like that. So there was always a cool feeling of progression. Like no matter what you did, there was always something fun that was going to unlock. So I just remember always being excited about like, ooh, what's the next town going to look like? Like, we started with this sort of cave area, just dirt, kind of simple, and then there was like the ocean city by the sea type thing, and then there was the forest. So it was always neat to find out what the next building would look like or what the next town was going to be. I can remember always being really excited about that. Well guys, I think that's about it for my memories of Dark Cloud. Definitely one of the a JRPG you should definitely play on PS2. I have very fond memories, a really neat game, and the kicking off point for one of my favorite developers of all time, Level 5. So if for some reason you have not played Dark Cloud, find a way to play it. I don't know if it's available on the Classic Store, but if you have a PS2, I'm sure this game's dirt cheap, so you can definitely go find a copy somewhere and get your hands on it and check it out. And if you have played it, guys, definitely let me know what you thought of the game, if you enjoyed it back in the day, or if it was sort of this weird experience that you just couldn't get into. I'd love to hear what you think, and we can talk about it in the comments below. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to another episode of JRPG Journal, and we will see you next week. Take care. Thanks again, everybody, for watching this week's episode of JRPG Journal. I hope you really enjoyed it. That was kind of cool to remember different elements and different moments from Dark Cloud, a really cool classic PS2 game. If you haven't already, make sure you check out my 11 JRPGs you can play in 2015 video. I break down all of the JRPGs that you can play this year, and by the time this video comes out, one might be out already, so now you'll be able to have a little mini review, so you can check that game out. And also, I want to let you know that I have a Patreon account. If you want to support the show and help it grow, you can click the link in the description to head on over there now. And if you don't feel like contributing, that's totally okay. Videos just like this will be coming every week for free on YouTube. Thank you once again for your support and for checking out my channel, and we'll see you next time.